I love this part. I love this part. This is our former Packer profile. And today we are focusing on the great tight end for the Green Bay Packers, Paul Coffman. He played from 1978 to 1985 for the Green Bay Packers. Three-time Pro Bowler and 322 receptions, 4,223 yards, 39 touchdowns. Again, Packer Hall of Famer, inducted in 1994. The tight end of my childhood, I remember his curls when that helmet was off on the sideline like it was yesterday, and loved what he did. But what is your biggest remembrance? What is the fact about Paul Coffman, Peter, that stands out the most for you?
I'm not sure that there's a single fact. I think the biggest thing, you can look at his play on the field that we'll talk about. I think the biggest thing for me, I guess, is his whole story. Coming from a really small town, was a walk-on in college, was undrafted, was the fifth or sixth guy on the depth chart when the Packers called him in as basically training camp fodder. And there's a story behind how he ever even got to Green Bay. Was given a number in the 90s. Well, that pretty much tells you you're not sticking around when you give a tight end a number in the 90s. And I think it's as much that story to overcome all of that through pure hard work, persistence, practice. That to me is a great story. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. And we'll touch on his on the play field and the fact that he was around in an era where he got Pro Bowl recognition, in an era where there were some great tight ends around at the same time, the Ozzie Newsomes, the Kellen Winslows, those guys. But it's that story for me that just sums up, I think, Paul Coffman as an individual.
Yeah.
For me, it was fabulous player, so fun to watch, and just the guy you could always count on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comparison, if you like, because he absolutely did take over from Rich McGeorge. Whenever anybody talks about Rich McGeorge, and somebody asks, well, who would you compare him to? Paul Coffman's actually the closest guy where there's a decent amount of film that I would, in Packers history, that I would compare Rich McGeorge to. And McGeorge, absolutely first round draft pick. I think, if memory serves me, and you can probably check this, at Elon College, I believe, McGeorge.
Yes, that is true. Yeah, that's correct.
But yeah, I'm a big fan of McGeorge too, and then Paul Coffman is the man. And I guess similar to you guys here in the UK, we first started getting games on TV in the early 80s. And one of the first games that they showed on TV was in 82. It was the Packers-Rams in week 1. And the Rams jumped out to, I can't remember, somebody will remember, something like a 23-0 lead at halftime. And the Packers came back to win that game with Dickey and Coffman and Lofton and Jefferson and all of those guys. And that kind of created a whole group of UK Packers fans from that point, who are still knocking around as Packers fans today. So there's lots of Packers fans over here who absolutely have the same kind of generational thing, that's their Packers team, that, if you will.
Yeah. But with Paul Coffman, how would you, because back then, again, you had Kellen Winslow. He came out and was he 79? Ozzie Newsome 78, so around the same time as Coffman. Was he the third best tight end in the league?
In that kind of era.
Pass
I mean,
catching,
he was spoken of with those for that 3 or 4 years. I guess probably from 79 to 83, 84 would been Paul's kind of peak years. And in that era, he was spoken of in the same breath as Kellen Winslow and Ozzie Newsome, and I'm trying to think of the others. Todd Christensen from the Raiders.
Oh, sure.
Jimmy Giles of the Bucks was a great tight end in that era. And he was absolutely spoken of in the same terms. And it was, I guess, the real beginning of the pass catching tight end era, as Eric said earlier, when you go back from into the 70s and obviously back into the 60s, you know, the tight end was a dual purpose guy, but it wasn't really until I call it the Kellen Winslow era of tight ends, because he was, for me, just an exceptional talent on that San Diego team that threw the ball all over the field, that Jefferson was on with Wes Chandler and Charlie Joyner and all of those, Air Coryell. But that era kind of started to generate the great pass catching tight ends. You know, and that's continued to this day when we see the George Kittles and those, you know, the Zach Ertzes and those types of guys. But that all started around that 78, 79 period.
Yeah.
So I always group all of those guys together. You know, I think of Kellen Winslow because I think of that San Diego team with Dan Fouts that just threw the ball all over the field. But I think you group those 4 or 5 together. You know, some of those guys like Ozzie had a really long career. But yeah, I like to group those guys together, and I think if Paul had the good fortune to play on some better teams, I think his level of notoriety would have been higher.